And while I was talking to a radio show host from a public station in Washington, D.C., a woman called in and said, I read that book. I realized it wasn't my fault and I left him. Which is one of the more moving statements I've ever heard from a reader. So she was able.
Hi, everyone. It's Samantha Tennant, and welcome to another video book club for fresh fiction. Tonight, we have one of the grand dames of the romance world with us, Mary Jo Putney. I have been reading her for years. My shelves are filled with historical novels of Mary Jo's that I still keep my actual paperback copies. I haven't moved to E for everything. Mary Jo has been writing since 1987. She has been on all sorts of best-selling lists, has received career achievement awards, lifetime achievement awards, and is just a fan favorite. So Mary Jo Putney, it is so great to see you this evening.
Hi, Stephanie. It was just really out of the blue, nice to be invited to appear here. And I'm impressed at everybody's reading lists. I don't seem to have as much time to read as I used to be, which is a problem most writers have.
Yeah, this is definitely where we get a lot of ideas for new books, see what everybody's interested in. And it's always surprising just that new author that we can find. But I'm interested in your comment because I've read this in other places that a lot of times writers say it's been interesting once they actually became a writer, how challenging sometimes it then is to remain a reader for pure enjoyment. Do you find that, or do you find that your reading style has changed over the years?
I think that we're harder to.
She's frozen.
Before
Okay,
I became a writer, I might have been a little more tolerant of it.
Yeah.
Mary Jo, I think we froze. And I hate to say this, can you repeat that?
I'm not sure I can even remember that long. Okay, I'm getting a little note. Your internet connection is unstable, and I don't know if it's.
Okay, I'm moving back and forth.
And once that little editor is going off in your brain, you get more tolerant of sloppiness or stupidity or just plain wrong writing. But fortunately, there's a lot of really good writers out there. I am currently reading the Jane Castle Harmony book that was just released yesterday. And takes a psychic, and she's always so much fun to read. I adore the dust bunnies, and I have a few of them around here myself. Usually Princess Flufferbella is here on my desk, but I guess she's snoozing somewhere.
I have to admit, I think the dust bunnies are a favorite of everyone that has read Jane's books.
I envisioned them as looking like koalas, only with more fur.
And of course, with glowing eyes.
Of course, oh yes, four glowing eyes, 6 paws, and you don't see the teeth until it's too late.
Exactly, yes. We're all familiar with those.
Yes.
And again, we were talking about this some in the early portion of our book club, the element of the fantasy into some of our romances. And of course, we both love Jane. We're familiar with the Dust Bunnies and the romantasy elements, but you have that also in your new series. Can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind this series with both Silver Lady and Golden Lord, and you've brought in this fantastical element in each?
Actually, these are not the first books I've ever written that way. I have a whole fantasy Guardian series, people with magical powers that they have to hide. And then when my publisher didn't want to do any more of them, I wrote a trilogy of young adult books that were time-traveling teen mages that went from the Napoleonic period to World War II to help their country against invasion. And so I've been writing fantasy for a long time. When I was a kid, more than anything, I read science fiction and fantasy. There was more science fiction then. I can still quote bits of Robert Heinlein. I remember there was one phrase in one of his books about a bagpipe player looks and sounds like a man with a cat under his arm and he has its tail in his mouth, biting it. Isn't that a great description?
Very fitting, yes.
So once I
do you find that you have to do a different style with that, or when you're adding those fantasy elements in?
They have to fit. It's true with any story. You have to make it seem reasonable and logical and part of the story. And some stories just lend themselves to it. One of my more popular fantasy romances, historicals, is called The Marriage Spell. And unfortunately, that's when the publisher dumped me. And I've gotten hundreds of emails from people saying, are you ever going to write any more in that series? I had cats to feed and a mortgage to pay. So I put that aside for a while and I did the young adult books. But I'm hoping, I'm semi-retired now. I just don't have the stamina to do the longer books. It was getting harder and harder to deliver. So now I'm going to be doing novellas. And one of the ones I want to do in the next year is a sequel to one of the marriage spell characters, because I like them. I just hate leaving a good man wasted. You have to find somebody that's good enough for him and vice versa.
And I remember, didn't you take one of the side characters in one of the more of the paranormal historicals and respin it into more of a straight historical, so to speak?
I got dumped with the marriage spell and I needed to find a new publisher. And at that time, none of the historical publishers, and they all said, oh, we love Mary Jo, but we don't want to do that history and fantasy blend. Like I said, I'm a pragmatist. I went to straight historicals for Kensington, which has been a great place for me to be. And the first two books that I did for them, Loving a Lost Lord and Never Less Than a Lady, were actually not magical versions of characters from the marriage spell. If you have a good character, you can turn them all kinds of different ways. But I missed the magic part. So that's why I'm doing it again with Silver Lady and Golden Lord. I'm working on a Christmas novella for Kensington that is in that series, another one of the characters of the family of the tribe of Tremaine, which are basically gifted kids, many of whom were thrown away by their families because nobody liked it, and were taken in and raised by Reese and I can't even remember her name at the moment, and raised together as brothers and sisters. And they're all interesting people. They've all had their own journeys.
And you were saying earlier that part of the trick is that all of these different elements have to fit, and so that it then makes sense. So as you're doing that, it's historically based. So you have that element of making sure that there is an element that it is accurate to the time period. But then to make these other elements fit, which are not exactly true to life, are they things that you're incorporating in at the same time? Do you go back and say, okay, is this something that I need to add more to it, or this is too fantastical, I need to pull it back? Is it a multi-step process, or what is your thoughts as you go through that?
You're making me sound more rational than I am. It's more of a storytelling thing. Like with Silver Lady, which is the first of these two books, I knew I wanted to set it in Cornwall because the Celtic fringes of Britain are a place where I think that magic would linger. And I also needed some kind of real world threat to tie it to. So I did some research and found that there is this, like one of the largest Royal Naval shipyards was right there on the border between Devon and Cornwall. And there had been a huge explosion which killed everybody on board just a couple of years before. So I thought, I can threaten to burn down a ship. And then you find your ways for your heroic characters to stop that from happening. And one thing leads to another, and side characters start appearing, and you think they look interesting too. And you have to make them convincing in their way. And sometimes you get to the end of the book and what's going to happen? Oh, yeah, I can make that happen. But like I said, it's more instinct than rationality.
Is that also because one of the other things with a lot of your books are the other plot points? There's usually some other element that needs to be overcome, like with the Silver Lady, where she was suffering from amnesia. Other books, you're dealing with other serious topics where they believe they're going to die. There might be sickness, these other harsher elements that they have to overcome. Again, is that part of the additional conflict to the story? Do you just like to, or do you enjoy tormenting your own characters? Is there an undiscovered mean streak that you have, Mary Jo?
It's more a matter of everybody faces trauma in life. There's just all kinds of things. And as an example, one of the contemporaries that I wrote, The Burning Point, the hero and the heroine were married and he became abusive and she left him. And then they're thrown together again years later. And it turns out he'd had an abusive alcoholic father. And it wasn't until he stopped drinking and looked at himself that he stopped drinking. And he went to a therapist, even though he was a good old boy kind of guy. And he became a better and kinder person. And while I was talking to a radio show host from a public station in Washington, D.C., a woman called in and said, I read that book. I realized it wasn't my fault and I left him. Which is one of the more moving statements I've ever heard from a reader. So she was able to look at that story, see the kinds of issues, see what was going on in her own life, and make a change. And to me, that's beyond price.
And I think that's one of the things that I know sometimes gets us so mad as romance readers is when people who don't read romance, oh no, this is light reading, fluff, pick your appropriate adjective that kind of blows it off. No, there's so many things that people either see themselves in, circumstances that they see, hey, this is something similar, I can overcome this also. And there's just so many stories that just really stick with you. You've seen, with all of your books and publishing for so long, have you seen that trend continue to grow? Or have you had other interesting stories where people have come up to you on books?
There are some writers that are attracted to that kind of thing because we want to see people made better. And a good storytelling can really do that. But some writers are just really good at the light and banter kind of thing. It's not my strong point. There's just so many ways to write a story. And readers find the ones that speak to them the most. And one of the nice things about writing historicals is they don't get dated the way contemporaries do. There's no cell phones to worry about, that kind of thing. And working with real history gives it more resonance. I keep coming back to the Napoleonic Wars, Waterloo, Wellington, because there was so much going on there. And it reminds me of in World War II, Britain stood alone against Germany for a long time. And in the Napoleonic period, the same thing was true. And that's why when I wrote my young adult trilogy, the kids were going from the world fighting Napoleon to a world fighting Nazis, because there was that resonance between those two areas. It just really interested me. I wanted to write about it. I hope that if it interests me, it's going to interest other people.
You find that there are certain novels that have really stuck with readers. I know for me, one of yours that I go back to, and I even have this in a hardcover that I managed to find, is The One Perfect Rose. That I don't even remember when it was actually published, but it's like one of those I go back to. I know it was The Last and the Fallen Angels, and it's like, oh, that's the one I always want to reread.
I think it was published around 1998. And again, it was one of those big question books. What do you do when you're running out of life? And he didn't die because it's a romance. And I also, if anybody knows what Munchausen by proxy syndrome is, that was involved in that. But also, he was a guy who had always tried to play the game the right way. And all of a sudden, the end was near. So he broke away from his old life, went and found a new life, a new lady, and a kitten. And to me, it was interesting. I talked to the husband of a friend of mine who had gone through a big cancer thing. And he talked about what it was like for him. I like experiences that can resonate with people. Because if it interests me, again, it's going to interest some other people.
Do you find that's an element that has changed over the years for you with writing?
Not really. Like you said, it's nice to torment people. One of the things about writing in the Regency period is it's glamorous and all, but men had all the power. Historically, this has been mostly true. So I figure if a guy is an aristocrat, he really needs to be knocked around some to get some empathy. And my guys get knocked around and are much better for it.
That they do, yes. Just a little bit, huh?
Like I said, it's for their own good.
You did write some contemporaries. Did you find that to be a different rewarding experience, or kind of a, hey, I did that, I'm done, that's really not where my passion lies, and I'm really firmly embedded in the Regency?
Well, I guess I felt like stretching myself. And I had read a story in the Baltimore Sun newspaper about the world's largest controlled demolition company, which is based here. I thought, that's really interesting how that works. So how do I put that into a story? So it started a heroine whose father blew down buildings. She wanted to do it. He was an old-fashioned guy. Girls don't blow down buildings. And that was also one that had to do with the hero's abusive alcoholic tendencies. So all those things tied together. And at the end, one of the things that she does is recognize that under the right circumstances, she can be violent too. She's not just a nice girl. Just so many things that kind of come out of the writing. I like to see people challenged and made better, stronger in the mended places.
And did you find that you had a different process in writing those? Or is a good story still a good story?
It's a good story, is still a good story. It wasn't a different process, but I spent quite a bit of time obsessing about coming up with a contemporary voice that because I've been writing historicals so long. In a way, that ended up being an intuitive process that it needed to sound contemporary, and I think it does. In terms of the process, the story is like you inch by inch, you put the pieces together. And I find that when I'm writing, if I hit a wall and I can't keep going, it's because something isn't working right. And I can't keep going until I figure out what it is and I fix it. It's a real inchworm thing. I have a friend who writes three times as fast as I do, or even faster. I can't imagine why we're still friends, but her process works for her and mine works for me.
You mentioned that you're also starting to write more novellas. And
Oh,
so
I've
even
written a
with the
lot of them
novella, it
already.
has a different pacing,
It has a
right?
different. My theory of novellas, it has a beginning and end and not much middle, which is good. You go through the whole process in a fairly short period of time. The excitement of the idea, the freaking out in the middle, how am I going to end this? And then the happiness of finishing, all of it in a much shorter length of time. And a good novella, it has a lot of power. And I just like writing them. I've written a lot of them, and I've published many of them as freestanding ebooks because sometimes you just don't have time for a whole book. Or it's a good thing to do with side characters that maybe aren't complicated enough to have a whole book, but they're still good guys. You still want to write about them.
And so that was one of the things I was going to ask. So if you're publishing them as standalone or freestanding ebooks, are they also going to be part of larger anthologies? Because I know, again, I have on my shelf different ones that you've partnered with other authors and
So the ones I've written so far, some of them are extensions of existing series, like my Silk series, which is exotic destinations. Like there are three of the trilogy. At the end of the third one, which took place in India and Afghanistan and stopping a war between the whole Muslim world and Great Britain. And there was a really great brother character that I wanted to write about. So there was one little throwaway line in that book where the younger brother says to the older brother, I'll get my own piece of Scotland someday. So I started a book in 2016 and wasn't able to finish it until last fall as a novella. So I sent him back to Scotland because he'd been talking about how he wanted a piece of Scotland. And I ended with a big family reunion of all of the main characters from the trilogy there celebrating around the tree. And one of the earlier heroes, a low-key one, pulling the heroine of the novella out of the way and said, don't worry, they're just Camerons being Camerons as they all go crazy meeting the long-lost brother. And it was just really fun to me, and I hope it's fun for some of the readers as well.
Okay. But also, what is that like? Okay, you said that you started that with the idea in 2016, and that's almost 10 years, not quite, but almost 10 years of then working on that before it comes to fruition. So is it just a couple ideas here working on it? You make notes here and go back? Is it you were getting pulled away on other contracts? Just how do you keep that spark alive?
Particular story I had written maybe the first 4 or 5 pages. I knew the setup that I wanted. Basically, he goes home to Scotland. There's a young mad girl staying at this Scottish inn. There's a blizzard. Her very unpleasant guardians don't worry much when she escapes in, so she dies in the snow. And he's not going to let that happen, so he goes after her. And that idea was in my head, and it wasn't until last fall that I wrote it out. And I am doing print editions of the novellas as well, so if somebody wants something on their shelf, because sometimes you just want a print book. But again, the characters are very alive in my head. Every now and then some of them might come along and say, wait, we're waiting here.
Do you find that, okay, so if they're always alive, do you find you have to get yourself in the mood to go back and revisit? The timeline is just blowing my mind.
When I'm doing the full-length novels, that's a commitment to my publisher. I may deliver late, but I will deliver. My lovely editor of many years at Kensington, when she first started writing my books, she came from another company. I told her that I'm always late, but when it comes in, it's really clean. And when she got the first book for me that I was doing, she emailed me from the train into New York and said, you're right, it's really late and it's really clean. And we worked together very well. She retired the same month I said I didn't want any more contracts, January last year. I met a lot of great people in this business, readers, writers, editors. One of the things I like about it is it's mostly a women's business, and it has that female empowerment.
And I think that's one of the things too, that even as readers, that we tend to embrace, right? So many of the books that at least I think that our fresh fiction readers tend to talk about have those strong women characters. Either they're overcoming some type of trials and tribulations, or they're the ones really driving the entire story. And
Mhm.
that tends to be the common theme in a lot of
Mhm.
our books, irrespective of which genre
Absolutely.
we're really focused on.
A writer friend of mine many years ago was referring to some of the early Harlequins that basically have to do with she's a clerk typist. He is a really rich man. He torments her for the whole length of the book. And then at the end, he says, "Don't you know, you little fool, I've loved you from the beginning." You just want to whack him.
Yeah, pretty much. We've got to have a little bit more than that. Yeah.
We do. There's so many great writers out there and so many great stories, and the heroines are very seldom wimpy.
No. Wimpy, not the term I would tend to use to describe characters in really any of the books I'm currently reading.
Exactly. We
And
like
definitely
strong
not
women.
yours.
Yeah, but mine are fairly capable of taking care of themselves. But there's one of the things that runs through so many romances, particularly historicals, is the Cinderella fantasy, because men had the money and the power, and women generally didn't. They had to figure out how to survive. Sometimes they had to support other family members. So the Cinderella thing of by the end of the book, she's going to have hot tub bath, which they had in that time, and never have to worry about what's for dinner again. And that's a fantasy I think we can all embrace.
Definitely, yes.
Mhm.
Mary Jo, I want to switch over to what we call our fresh fiction facts. These cover
Mhm.
a range of topics, kind of answers off the top of your head. Okay.
Okay.
Who would you most want to be stuck in an elevator with?
My characters or anybody's?
Anybody's.
Oh, tough call. I don't think that fast. I think there's so many heroes, so little time. One of my favorites from one of my books is Lord Robin Andreville, who was a mysterious and possibly dubious character in Petals in the Storm. And then at the end, when it turns out he was a really good guy and a really generous guy at letting go the woman he loved into to the go to the man she'd always loved. And when I gave him his book, and he was a really interesting fellow. He's a sneaky spy, he's golden blonde and innocent, and had done all kinds of wonderful things in the war and was suffering from severe PSTD when he got home again. And he'd be fun. I wonder if he'd ever forgive me, though. So maybe I shouldn't put him into the elevator.
Don't get into the tight enclosed space. How you need to have the escape route.
Was half Iroquois. And her father was an English gentleman who was loose fish who went to the United States, and her mother was an Iroquois. And as a matter of fact, my mother taught at a school in upstate New York, Western New York, that was a reservation school for the Senecas, which were the keepers of the Western Gate, and the Mohawks were the keepers of the Eastern Gate for the various tribes of the Iroquois Confederation. And to me, again, that was interesting.
Wow. What with that? Okay, off of the fresh fiction facts then. With that type of exposure, have you ever thought or had elements that you wanted to go more into that American history element, even though you had the one
Um,
character who was no, no.
Oh, she fit the
That was
story.
a
She's
quick
a great character. It's more a matter of that's not where my fantasies are. Like I said, the Cinderella fantasy. And I lived in England for over 2 years. I was the art editor of a startup magazine. And the guy I was living with was working on a master's degree in Oxford then. And I just have always been fascinated by English history. When I was in college, for a whole 2 semesters, I got up 3 times a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and sat in on an 8 a.m. British history class, didn't take it for credit because I just loved history. This teacher talking about English history. So I don't know where I got that. It seems to be inherent. But I will
I can
say the
understand that.
name
I
Putney.
attend Egyptology lectures down at the local college once a month.
Okay.
So
Mhm.
again, just for pure enjoyment and to take advantage of this when you come across them. Yeah.
The name Putney is very English. And if you go to London, there's one of the boroughs is called Putney. And it's really strange to walk down the street and see a bus coming towards you with your name on its forehead.
Could give you a complex, yes.
Well, I'd always kind of blink with it. The Putneys were early Puritans who came over for religious freedom to New England, like 1630. So I don't have any American fantasies because I'm so American. want something a little more
You want
exotic.
that escape. With that, where would you say is your ideal paradise?
Oh, Virgin Gorda in the British Virgins is a beautiful place to go and relax and see the sun and the waves and so forth. If you want a paradise, that's a pretty good paradise. But it's sort of more interesting to travel to different places and see different things. My husband and I have done quite a lot of traveling, and we like cruise ships because it's like climbing into your hotel and it sails to the next country. You don't have to pack and unpack all the time, and you get to see interesting new things.
Okay, other than books, what is something that you own a ridiculous amount of?
You've seen my backdrop here. Those are the books. Ridiculous amount. Stuffed animals.
Stuffed animals.
Yeah, we've got all kinds of stuffed animals. It started out with one bear, and then another bear came in, and we made up stories for them. And my husband, who's an engineer, is just as bad at this as I am. And they all have stories. And we kept adopting more and more until we had so many bears, we got a bearatorium. And then the sheep came in. So I have a whole flock of sheep. The most recent one, we got it on a cruise of the British Isles, and we stopped at Wales. And there was this really sweet little sheep among a whole bunch of little sheep. So I adopted her, and then the checkout clerk said I could call her Saren, which means the star in Welsh. So she was a happy addition to the rest of the sheep. They love her Welsh accent.
What luxury item can you not live without?
I guess I'm not introspective enough. I would really hate to give up ice cream.
Oh man, I can relate to that one. Yeah. That one hit me during COVID. I didn't have any ice cream. I was really yearning for it. Couldn't quite justify going to the store to buy ice cream. And a friend ordered and had it delivered to me. I got a nice pint of,
As a friend.
yes,
Friend
chocolate
of
chip mint. It got delivered, and I opened up that door, and the delivery person probably thought I was absolutely crazy because I laughed like a loon because it was so unexpected.
I'm so generous. That's a friend who knows what you want and will go.
Yes. So let's see. What is the most unnecessary thing that you've ever bought online or as seen on TV?
Oh, unnecessary. You ask hard questions. I tend to buy things online that I think are necessary. I like scarves and shawls. It's not like I need another one, but here's a particularly, let's see if I can pull this out from behind me. A particularly nice one that's just full of colors. I got this on Amazon. I can't say that I need it, but I love it. Just look at those colors.
I like the colors. Yeah.
So
Yes.
every now and then I indulge myself in something like that.
What is something that can immediately take you out of a story? One, either that you're reading or if it's a movie or a TV show.
If there's a logic flaw, if people are jumping to conclusions that make no sense, or like have started watching this series on BritBox called Ludwig about a kind of a neurodiverse guy who's a twin brother, and his brother, who's a detective, is kidnapped, and his sister-in-law drags him in so they can find him. And in the second episode, which we watched last night, some people taking a class that was taught by a person who had been swindling them accidentally caused his death. And one person drives his car to a suicide spot on the coast. But what they did with the dead body was break into a hotel wall, put him in there, and then fix the wall and so forth. Why do you put a body in the house, a building room really, right next to the check-in? Is this an intelligent thing to do? I didn't think so. It was interesting, but it was a little hard to follow. If you were going to kill somebody, would you put them in your closet?
No, we have lots of theories of the best way to dispose of bodies afterward. We've had that as a fresh fiction question before, and we came up with a wide range of answers on that one.
You know what they say that a friend is when you call and say, help, I need help. She says, do I bring a shovel and how deep?
Exactly.
Or send ice cream.
Flipping it, if the bad logic is what takes you out of a story, what four authors do you believe should go on a Mount Rushmore for writing?
Jane Krantz. I've read all of her different forms, and Over the years, her writing has gotten more sleek and on point. Things always fit together. It's really easy to read, and it always works. And of course, Dust Bunnies. Or for fantasy, Lois McMaster Bujold, or Sharon Shin, or I tend to like female fantasy writers who do good, strong fantasy stories. And they usually often have romantic elements as well. This could be a very deep rabbit hole.
Okay, we'll cut it off. Okay, that's fine. Okay, what is your most dog-eared book? What is the one that you just keep going back to, either for enjoyment or for research?
Oh, I have a book called The Complete London Encyclopedia, which is wonderful for research. It's just this thick. There's all kinds of information about streets and buildings. And speaking of dust bunnies, this is Princess Flufferbella.
Oh, look at that face.
She was a rescue kitty. She's been in several of my stories.
Oh,
And she's a little indignant at being grabbed, but she spends a lot of time on But she looks like a Maine Coon, a downsized Maine Coon. She has just about all of the
yeah.
characteristics, but who knows? She wandered into the backyard of a cat rescuer in January. Is this a smart cat or what?
Wow. Yep. People definitely adopt, rescue. That's the way to go.
Well, the cat hospital at Towson, where I take my cats for medical work, has an adoption cage for cats that have been brought in by Cat Rescue of Maryland. And you go in and you see this cat there in the cage. And he looks like a nice cat and he needs a home. And you go over and you pet him a little and see if he seems friendly. And then next thing you know, the herd has expanded.
Mary Jo, one thing that our readers always want to know is what are you working on next, and where is the best place for people to keep up with what you're actually working on?
I have a website, and I still think that websites are very good because you can have as much information there. And mine is maryjoputney.com. And it shows the books by series. There's always a excerpt so people can see if the writing style appeals to them. And I think that's a very good place to be. And you can get on my mailing list, and I don't send newsletters too often. I'm also a member of a group called Word Wenches. We're bloggers, wordwenches.com. And we have been blogging since 2006, probably the oldest writer's blog on the internet. And we post 3 times a week, and we're a diverse group. And we have an Australian, 2 Britons, and the others are Americans. There's 7 of us, and once had a Canadian. And I'd like to say that the sun never sets on the Wench Empire. And it's a fun blog to go to because there's always interesting things there, and everybody has their own particular things that they know. Nicola Cornick, who's a wonderful writer and lives in England, just posted a blog about royal beds in historic houses. Like these huge, massive 4-posters and so forth. One of them had a canopy so heavy it weighed almost a ton. So God help you if it fell on you when you're asleep. There's just always something interesting there. So the Word Wenches, we also do a newsletter, and you can sign up for a newsletter on my website, maryjoputney.com. And also, of course, the ebook platforms, you can follow somebody and then they will let you know when a book is coming out. What I'm working on now is the Christmas novella that is set in the Golden Lord world. Although there's enough else going on that I'm behind. I'm always behind. It's a character flaw.
That means we always have something to look forward to.
Sorry?
That means we always have something that we can look forward to.
Oh, I hope so, yes.
You're behind, but you're working on things, so we have something to anticipate.
Well, like I said, I like the shorter things. I've done a short story for a Halloween collection for Dragon Blade, and I don't know how many of your readers know Dragon Blade, but it's a historical romance imprint, all historical romance. And they turn a number of books every month, and they have a wide variety of historical writers. And it was called A Wraith at Midnight, was the Halloween anthology. So I wrote a story. It had included my 2 cats, Princess Flufferbella as Lady Fluff, and Riley the Rogue, who turned in as the Black Rogue. And he was a young, somewhat stupid cat who didn't keep track of his number of lives. So it was just a fun story to write. And of course, there's a happily ever after. There's a romance. Lady Fluff did her job. I'm petting her now. But I'm also going to be doing a couple of other sort of novella length things for them because they give me a lot of elbow room. And I've been lucky to have many editors who let me do pretty much what I wanted. I've had occasionally people say, your editor let you do that? Why not? And again, it's a matter, can you make it work? If you can make it work in the context of a romance, you can have a lot of elbow room.
Definitely. Mary Jo, it was great talking with you. Be sure and stick around for the happy hour with our readers. And for everyone listening and tuning in, be sure and get Mary Jo Putney's Golden Lord. If you were one of our Fresh Fiction box subscribers, you would have received it a couple of months ago when it first came out. So I want to give that plug. And again, I'm Samantha Tennant, and thank you for joining the Fresh Fiction Video Book Club.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I love being surrounded by readers.